The title of this research paper is, Can the Hiramic legend be found in the Bible? That is obviously a question, and the author hopes by the time you reach the end of this work, you will have found the answer to that question. For a good definition of legends and traditions, let us consider the one given by Dr. E. Raymond Capt in his book, The Traditions of Glastonbury. He says, and I quote, "Consider traditions. They cannot be dismissed as mere fables, for legend is not fiction, nor is truth confined only to that which can be established by documentary evidence. It is a fact that legends and traditions are generally rooted in a basis of truth. In the absence of proof to the contrary, there is no reason why one should not accept traditions as having a foundation in fact."
Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation, From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
The Master Mason degree tells us that the Grand Master Hiram Abif was no longer alive at the time the temple was completed. But we find secular history telling us that he was alive and well at the dedication of the temple. How could both stories be true? There is a way. How do we find out? The clue is this. If we can separate the two accounts, it is possible that we have two stories about two different people. Where could we turn to find an answer to our question? We must turn to the most obvious place of all, the great light of Masonry, the Holy Bible. There we will find our answer. When we look at the Holy Bible, we find that there are two accounts of the building of King Solomon's temple. We find an account in 1 Kings and another in 2 Chronicles. Why two accounts? Were there two temples? We know better than that. There was but one temple, so we must understand the history that leads us to find two accounts. Let's go back in time. Dr. John Gestetner, former professor of church history at the Xenia Theological Seminary in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, had a favorite question. If you were to summarize the Bible in one word, what would your choice be? His choice, and I agree with him, was redemption. God knew before the fall of Adam that he would fall, and provided a means to redeem him, which was the promise he made to Adam. The call of Abraham was the beginning of the implementation of that plan of redemption. Abraham was given many blessings, and these blessings were passed on to his son Isaac, and then passed on to his son Jacob. Jacob was the father of 12 children. His son Joseph was his favorite. You have probably heard the story of how Joseph was hated by his brothers and sold into slavery, and went through numerous negative experiences. Refusing the advances of Pharaoh's wife, she then accused him of raping her. Falsely accused, thrown into prison, this man had nothing but bad times. But in the end, when Pharaoh had a dream and could not understand it, he was told of a man in prison that could tell him its meaning. Pharaoh sent and had Joseph brought to him, and when he interpreted the dream, Pharaoh made him number 2 man in all of Egypt. He had tremendous power. His own people, his father and his brothers, were going through a great famine. They came to him, and he saved them. He forgave them. He loved them. He loved his father, and his father was happy to see his son. Israel was near death, and he called his sons to him, and of his 12 sons he first blessed the 11. But when he blessed Joseph, he passed the blessings on to his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and said that they shall be known by his name, Israel. Now we find the 12 sons of Jacob become the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel. And we know also that there is the 13th tribe, namely the tribe of Manasseh, because of Joseph's blessing being split between his 2 sons. We find the history of the Hebrew people going on until the death of Solomon. After Solomon's temple was completed by our ancient brethren, we find the 10 northern tribes, known as the Kingdom of Israel, rebelled against Solomon's son Rehoboam and complained about the heavy tax burden that his father had placed upon them. Well, things haven't changed much. We're still griping about taxes. The tribe of Judah, with the Benjaminites, remained loyal to Rehoboam, who then doubled the tax burden of the people. This caused the 10 northern tribes to secede from the monarchy, and thus the Hebrew nation suddenly became 2 kingdoms, the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. As we go forward in history, we find that, about 100 years before the destruction of the temple by Nebuchadnezzar, the Assyrians conquered the 10 northern tribes and hauled them off to the Caucasus Mountains and took the people from that area, known as Samaria, and moved them to what was the kingdom of Israel, a common military maneuver at that time. When Christ went to Jerusalem, he found the Good Samaritan there. Also, he sent his apostles out to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Obviously, they were to go to where they had been moved. So the result of all this is that there was a split in recording the chronological actions of the kingdoms. There were now 2 kingdoms. The Book of Kings records the chronological events of the kings of Judah. Chronicles records the chronological events of the kings of Israel. Having Saul, David, and Solomon common to both kingdoms is why we have 2 accounts of the building of King Solomon's temple. Let us first look at Chronicles to see what we can find. We find in 2 Chronicles chapter 2 verse 3,
And Solomon sent to Hiram the king of Tyre, saying, As thou didst deal with David my father, and didst send him cedars to build him a house to dwell therein, even so deal with me.
Skipping down to verse 7,
Send me now therefore a man cunning to work in gold, and in silver, and in brass, and in iron, and in purple, and in crimson, and in blue. And that can skill to grave with the cunning men that are with me in Judah and in Jerusalem, whom David my father did provide.
Skipping further down to verse 13,
Hiram, king of Tyre, said, And now I have sent a cunning man, endued with understanding, of Hiram my father's, the son of a woman of the daughters of Dan, and his father was a man of Tyre, skillful to work in gold, and in silver, in brass, in iron, in stone, and in timber, in purple, in blue, and in fine linen, and in crimson, also to grave any manner of graving, and to find out every device which shall be put to him, with thy cunning men, and with the cunning men of my lord David thy father.
Skipping now to chapter 3, verse 1,
Then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem in Mount Moriah, where the Lord appeared unto David his father, in the place that David had prepared, in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. And he began to build in the 2nd day of the 2nd month, in the 4th year of his reign.
So we find Solomon, according to this story, talk to Hiram. By the way, why do we have this Hiram thing? Well, Hebrew has no vowels, so Hiram or Hiram would have been spelled the same. The King James translators tried to put vowels to get the proper English pronunciation, but made a few errors. They decided on the side of consistency. Throughout Chronicles, they used Hiram, and throughout Kings, they used Hiram. Nobody can be sure, but one thing we should note is that Solomon entered into an agreement with Hiram of Tyre to build the house and to have a man sent to him who could do everything. That man was the son of a woman of the daughters of Dan, and then the temple was built. Now let's look for a moment at 1 Kings. We find in chapter 6, verse 1,
And it came to pass in the 480th year, after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month Ziph, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of the Lord.
Going on, we find in verse 38,
And in the 11th year, in the month Bul, which is the 8th month, was the house finished throughout all the parts thereof, and according to all the fashion of it. So was he 7 years in building it.
Skipping over to chapter 7, we find King Solomon sent and fetched Hiram out of Tyre. He was a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali. The temple is done. So why did he have to fetch him? Why didn't he just ask for him to come if he needed him? Obviously, he was seeking to protect him. Who was he? Well, he was a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in brass only. And he came to Solomon, and he finished all of his work. What work? The temple was done. What have we learned from this? We have learned that a man was sent who was the son of a woman of the daughters of Dan. But here we find a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali. The first one, called Hiram in this instance, could do everything. He was not a widow's son. He was the son of a woman of the daughters of Dan. His father was a man of Tyre. The temple was completed. Then we find Solomon sent and fetched Hiram out of Tyre. He was a widow's son. The only way he could be a widow's son is if his father were dead. Who was this second man? Well, Abif in Hebrew means master or father. The first man was the master of the second, and probably his father. As is the case of many craftsmen, their father was their master, and if something were wrong and the father died, it would be logical to have his son complete the work, even though the temple was, for all intents and purposes, complete. It wasn't really finished, and Solomon, fearing that the same fate that befell the father would fall upon his son, sent and fetched him, meaning he sent armed guards, soldiers, to be sure that he arrived safely. When he arrives, what does he do? Well, let me read to you from 2 Chronicles chapter 4, verse 11. I'll read it verbatim, and you change the word to Hiram.
And Hiram made the pots, and the shovels, and the basins. And Hiram finished the work that he was to make for King Solomon for the house of God, to wit, the 2 pillars, and the pommels, and the chapiters which were on the top of the 2 pillars, and the 2 wreaths to cover the 2 pommels of the chapiters which were on the top of the pillars.
Finally, we find in verse 16 the culmination of it all.
The pots also, and the shovels, and the flesh hooks, and all their instruments did Hiram his father make to King Solomon for the house of the Lord of bright brass.
Let me read that again, for this is the second Hiram speaking of the first, because he could not do bright brass. What does he say?
The pots also, and the shovels, and the flesh hooks, and all their instruments did Hiram his father make to King Solomon for the house of the Lord of bright brass.
There were 2, and the second one was there for the dedication of the temple. The first one is honoured throughout all of Masonry and all of its degrees because he was the architect of the work. While we honour his memory, at the dedication of the temple he was dead. His son, being a widow's son, because his father was dead, finished the work of his father, and we find that revealed to us in the great light of Masonry, the Holy Bible. I started my paper asking you a question. Can the Hiramic legend be found in the Bible? I hope that I have now answered that question, and I thank you for affording me the opportunity to present this work to you.